They laughed the moment he stepped on stage, shouting that rock was only for the young. No one knew who the quiet man holding the worn bass guitar really was. But when the lights dimmed and he plugged in, everything changed. What happened next silenced an entire stadium, and the world hasn't stopped talking about it since. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sun had barely risen over Santa Cruz when the community amphitheater began to fill with a restless energy that only young musicians could bring. Each corner of the outdoor venue pulsed with excitement. Teenagers carried guitars on their backs, drumsticks in their pockets, and dreams in their eyes. Parents trailed behind them with folding chairs and coffee cups. The annual youth rock competition had returned, and for many of these young artists, it felt like the biggest day of their lives. Vendors lined the walkway leading to the stage, selling band merch, guitar straps, and even custom picks. A banner fluttered above the entry gate with bold red letters that read Santa Cruz Youth Rock Fest. Behind the stage, volunteers hurried back and forth with clipboards and radios. Some had been helping for years, and others were retired musicians who remembered what it felt like to be 16 and ready to take over the world. Amid the buzz, one group stood out for reasons that had nothing to do with talent. Razor Dog strutted into the backstage area like they owned the festival. They were an all-boys band with matching leather jackets and a confidence that bordered on disrespect. Zach, their 17-year-old lead singer, tossed his blonde hair back with the kind of arrogance that made the other bands look away. His attitude filled the space before the sound of his voice even had a chance to. The moment they crossed the backstage threshold, they began mocking everything in sight. One member bumped his shoulder into a smaller boy from another band and smirked. The guitarist laughed loudly at a handwritten sign that said, "Please keep this area clean." Zach pointed at a cluster of older volunteers adjusting stage lights and said loud enough for everyone to hear that he could not believe the festival still let old people handle the equipment. His friends laughed, and one added that they hoped the old folks did not break their hips before the show even started. Their voices echoed across the backstage corridor, causing heads to turn and jaws to tighten. Near the far end of the stage, an older sound technician named Bill patiently tuned a guitar amp. He had silver hair tied back in a ponytail and wore faded jeans that had seen decades of concerts. Razor Dog slowed as they passed him. Zach nudged his bassist, grinned, and said that watching someone that old still trying to handle rock gear was like watching a dinosaur with a microphone. Bill did not look up. He kept adjusting the knobs calm and steady as he had done for years. But the insult lingered in the air, creating a tension the other bands could feel. Some frowned, others whispered. Razor Dog only laughed harder, pleased with themselves. As more bands arrived, the judges took their seats at a long table beside the stage. Olivia, a respected music historian in her 40s, scanned the crowd with a thoughtful expression. She had witnessed countless competitions, but something about the atmosphere this year felt different. Maybe it was the growing divide between the young musicians and the older volunteers. Maybe it was the rising arrogance in performers who had only begun to understand rock music. Or maybe it was the quiet rumor circulating among the staff that a special guest might be appearing. A laminated schedule had been posted near the judges' station. Band names filled the blocks from morning to late afternoon. But one slot near the middle of the day drew attention. It read Guest Performer, TBD. No one knew who it was, no one knew what it meant, but the mystery alone added a spark to the festival that hummed beneath the surface. The morning grew louder as the first sound checks began. Cymbals crashed, guitars screeched, and drums thumped across the amphitheater as each band tried to outdo the next. Teenagers leaned over railings and pointed toward the stage, arguing about which group would win. Some parents carried camcorders ready to immortalize every chord their kids played. Others simply sat together, smiling at the chaos, enjoying the reminder of their own younger days. Backstage, however, the energy shifted as Razor Dog's arrogance continued to ripple through the area. Zach had apparently decided that intimidating the other bands was part of their strategy. He stalked into the green room, made a show of examining the shared snack table, and declared that only worthy musicians should get the good food. His friends laughed and grabbed all the chocolate bars, leaving empty wrappers behind. A younger drummer from a different band watched silently, disappointment settling into his face. Zach noticed and mocked him for caring about a simple snack. When the boy looked away, Razor Dog laughed even louder. Two judges exchanged glances. Olivia whispered to the judge beside her that the boys needed a lesson. Not humiliation, but humility. The other judge nodded and said that sometimes music taught that lesson better than any lecture. They both looked down at the competition schedule again, toward the mysterious middle slot labeled guest performer. TBD. Olivia tapped the page thoughtfully. By late morning, the amphitheater seats were nearly full. Vendors shouted out their discounts. Families settled into place. Judges organized their scoring sheets. The host for the event, a cheerful man in his 50s named Marlon, stepped up to the microphone to give the official welcome. "Good morning, Santa Cruz. You ready to rock?" The crowd roared in response. Razor Dog, seated near the side of the stage, smirked as the other bands cheered. Zach whispered to his bassist that the crowd was already theirs. His bassist replied that they were definitely the only band with a real rock image. They high-fived, convinced the competition was merely a formality before their inevitable victory. Marlon continued with the announcements. He explained that the judges had chosen a diverse lineup of young talent, each bringing their own sound to the stage. He reminded the audience that the competition was not only about winning, but about celebrating music across generations. The word generations made Zach snort. As Marlon reviewed the schedule, he hesitated for a moment before reading the mysterious entry. "And today, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special unannounced performance scheduled midway through the event. A guest performer who has chosen to remain anonymous. But trust me, you will not want to miss it." Excited murmurs shot through the crowd. Parents leaned toward one another. Teens pulled out their phones. Razor Dog exchanged amused looks. Zach rolled his eyes and muttered that mystery guests were usually washed-up local artists trying to relive their glory days. Behind Zach, a younger band member from a different group overheard and said softly that sometimes great musicians did not need attention. They just wanted to share their music. Zach brushed him off, saying that legends did not hide. They made sure everyone knew who they were. Marlon wrapped up his introduction and directed the first band to the stage. A group of 16-year-olds stepped forward nervously, tuning their guitars and whispering words of encouragement to one another. As the first notes of their performance echoed across the amphitheater, the crowd leaned in with genuine attention. But backstage, Razor Dog lounged with smug impatience. They were waiting for their turn, waiting to show off, waiting to take the spotlight as if it had been reserved for them alone. What none of them realized was that the day's most important performance had nothing to do with winning. Something much bigger was already on its way. The first band wrapped up their set with a shaky final chord, receiving warm applause from the audience and an encouraging nod from Olivia. While they exited the stage, smiling, Razor Dog reacted with a slow, sarcastic clap that made nearby volunteers turn away in discomfort. Zach stretched his legs out in front of him, leaned back in his chair, and announced that real music would begin only when they touched the stage. One of the judges overheard and raised an eyebrow. She leaned toward Olivia and commented that confidence was healthy, but arrogance could destroy even the most promising talent. Olivia quietly agreed. Her eyes drifted again toward the empty space reserved for the guest performer. The one part of the schedule that had drawn more curiosity than any competing band. She hoped that whoever stepped into that role would bring balance to the day. Back on stage, Marlon prepared to introduce the next group. The amphitheater buzzed with excitement as speakers rumbled and microphones squeaked. Parents waved at their kids from the crowd. Young musicians tightened their grips on their instruments, waiting for their turn. None of them knew that the anonymous guest performer was closer than they imagined, and none could guess how completely the day would change once he appeared. Razor Dog's rehearsal was scheduled just before noon, and by the time they walked onto the stage, the amphitheater had grown noticeably louder. Teens gathered near the railings to watch them warm up, and several younger musicians peeked from backstage to see what all the noise was about. Zach loved every second of the attention. He strutted up to the microphone stand like he was taking possession of a throne. His bleach blonde hair glowed under the stage lights, and the smug smile on his face widened with every cheer that rose from the crowd. He tapped the microphone twice, listened to the echo across the seating area, and grinned. The guitarist plugged in and unleashed a loud, distorted riff, drawing shouts from the teens in the audience. Zach threw his hands up and let them feed his ego. Their swagger was undeniable. They had practiced their stage presence almost as much as their music, and today their confidence bled into every movement. The drummer slammed into a quick solo, snapping the sticks against the snare and toms with impressive skill. Zach nodded approvingly and then signaled for the bassist to join in. Together they formed a wall of sound that echoed through the amphitheater like a declaration of dominance. Parents covered their ears, but the teens loved it. Razor Dog performed their warm-up like it was already the final round of the competition. Backstage, a small cluster of younger bands watched with mixed expressions. Some were impressed, some were intimidated, others were simply annoyed by Zach's showy attitude. But Razor Dog did not notice. They were too busy congratulating themselves. During a break in the rehearsal, Olivia stepped forward from the judge's table. She adjusted her glasses and offered Zach a polite smile. She had spent decades teaching the history of rock music and saw sparks of real talent in Razor Dog, even if their lack of humility overshadowed it. She asked Zach which artists had influenced their sound. She expected him to mention some classic bands, maybe a few modern names, but Zach scoffed before she even finished speaking. Old people always ask that. Influences do not matter. We create the future. Rock is evolution, not fossils. The way he emphasized the word fossils made several people nearby shift uncomfortably. His bandmates laughed and nodded in agreement, feeding off his arrogance. Olivia held her posture with grace, but her eyes revealed a quiet disappointment. She had seen talented young musicians burn out before they ever began because they believed their youth made them untouchable. She hoped Razor Dog would not become another name on that list. A younger band standing nearby overheard the exchange. One of their guitarists whispered to his friend that Zach did not even understand that every sound he played was built on decades of musicians who came before him. Zach shot them a sharp look, and the two boys immediately stepped back. Bill, the older roadie, stood near the edge of the backstage area, coiling a long cable. He had caught every word. He paused, lifting his eyes toward Zach as if evaluating him. Bill had spent his entire life working in music venues and had seen many young artists rise and fall. Zach's arrogance was nothing new, but something in his tone struck a deeper chord today. Bill pulled his phone from his pocket and typed a quick message. His hands moved calmly, almost knowingly, as if he already understood what needed to happen next. Zach wiped sweat from his forehead dramatically, as though the rehearsal itself had been a legendary performance. His bandmates followed his lead, swaggering off stage with exaggerated confidence. They walked straight past a younger group, trying to carry their amps to the warm-up area. Instead of stepping aside, Razor Dog pushed through them, forcing the smaller boys to press against the wall to avoid dropping their equipment. Zach glanced back with a smirk. Make room for the headliners. His tone made it clear he believed every word. The younger musicians said nothing. They simply exchanged frustrated glances and continued with their tasks. Many of them had worked hard just to stand on that stage, and the idea of confronting someone like Zach felt too risky. They were afraid of creating trouble before even performing. A teenage girl from another band approached Razor Dog cautiously, her guitar pick necklace bouncing lightly against her chest. She told them their riffs were impressive and tried to offer a compliment, but Zach cut her off halfway. Of course they were impressive. They were Razor Dog after all. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion. She stepped back without another word, no longer sure she even wanted to perform after witnessing their attitude. Their guitarist leaned against a speaker and bragged loudly that judges would crown them champions before the final chord of their competition set even finished. Their drummer chimed in and said that he expected a standing ovation so powerful that it would shake the rafters. Zach listened with satisfaction, soaking in the praise he believed belonged to him. While Razordog continued talking, Olivia walked toward the edge of the stage to observe the next band preparing for their rehearsal. Unlike Razordog, these teenagers worked with quiet determination. They helped one another tune their instruments and spoke with excitement rather than arrogance. Olivia found it refreshing. She watched them long enough to recognize how much heart they were putting into their performance. Then Razordog's laughter pierced through the air again. They were jeering at the band on stage, mocking the way they tested their sound levels. Razordog imitated the nervous singer, pretending to shake while holding the microphone. They then mocked the guitarist for playing a classic rock chord progression, calling it ancient. Zach made a dramatic bow and announced that outdated music belonged in museums, not competitions. Parents sitting near the edge of the stage turned and frowned. Some young musicians nearby lowered their eyes, unsure how to respond. Olivia tightened her jaw. She could feel the disrespect spreading like a shadow across what was meant to be a joyful event. Music was supposed to inspire, not belittle. Bill, who had finished his earlier tasks, returned to adjust a set of amplifiers. Razordog continued their mockery right beside him. One of the boys joked loudly that Bill probably listened to music on cassette tapes because he was too old to understand anything else. Zach followed up by saying that people like Bill needed to stay out of the way so real musicians could shine. Bill straightened slowly. His hands rested on the amplifier, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. He had heard Zach's earlier comment about fossils. Now he heard this. The pattern was clear. Razordog did not simply lack humility. They were starting to poison the atmosphere around them. Bill reached for his phone again, typing with deliberate movements. His expression remained calm, as if nothing unusual was happening, but the message he sent carried weight. He knew exactly who would understand what to do next. Razordog continued laughing, oblivious to the shift happening around them. The audience might have enjoyed their sound, but backstage the tide was beginning to turn. Judgment from those who truly understood music was forming quietly like thunder building far away. Something was coming, and Razordog had no idea. Razordog finally settled into a corner of the backstage tent, still laughing about the bands they had mocked. Zach leaned back with his feet up on an equipment case, bragging that no one in the competition had the skill or the charisma to match them. His bandmates cheered him on, repeating the same insults they had thrown around all morning. They were so wrapped up in their own confidence that not one of them noticed the shift in mood among the volunteers. Across the room, Bill quietly slipped his phone back into his pocket. He returned to coiling cables with a patient, thoughtful expression, but something about his posture suggested he was waiting for a reply. Olivia observed the boys from a distance, her face a mixture of frustration and concern. She exchanged a subtle glance with Bill, who gave the slightest nod. It was clear they both hoped the arrogant band would be humbled not through ridicule, but through something deeper, something that would make them understand the roots of the music they claimed to own. Zach remained unaware. He believed the day belonged to Razordog, but Bill knew that someone was already on the way, someone who could change everything with a single note. The first official performances of the competition began shortly after noon. One by one, younger bands stepped onto the stage with hopeful energy. Their voices trembled at first, but the supportive cheers from the crowd steadied their nerves. Parents clapped along, phone cameras rose into the air, and the amphitheater slowly filled with music that carried far beyond technical skill. What mattered most was heart. Many of these kids brought plenty of it. The audience appreciated every effort. Even when a guitarist missed a note or a drummer fell out of rhythm, the applause remained warm. A few teenagers in the crowd laughed at the mistakes, but most listened respectfully. Olivia, seated at the judges' table, took careful notes and offered encouraging nods when each band finished their set. She valued authenticity over perfection and knew that these competitions were often stepping stones for young musicians finding their identity. But no matter how sincere the earlier performers were, Razor Dog's impact hovered over the day like a shadow. Their rehearsal had created a buzz that the audience had not forgotten. Teens whispered about their swagger. Younger bands talked anxiously about performing after them. Even parents discussed how confident the boys had seemed. Their energy had stamped itself onto the festival in ways that were both exciting and unsettling. Backstage, Razor Dog moved with the same amplified presence. Even when they sat quietly, their earlier mockery lingered in the air. Musicians kept glancing at them, worried about whether the older boys would make fun of their sets. Whenever Razor Dog chuckled, someone nearby stiffened, assuming they were the target. The volunteers sensed the tension growing. Several exchanged uneasy looks as they passed each other with armfuls of cables or stacks of bottled water. Bill continued his work calmly, but his eyes flicked toward the back entrance every few minutes. His earlier message had been sent, but he had not yet received a reply. Even so, he seemed certain of what was coming. As another band finished performing, murmurs drifted through the backstage area like a subtle shift in the wind. At first, no one could tell where the whispers started. A few volunteers paused mid-task and looked toward the gate behind the stage. A couple of teens leaned in closer to each other, their faces bright with recognition or confusion. Something was happening, though the exact shape of it had not yet formed. Then someone noticed her. A woman in her 30s quietly stepped through the back gate, her face calm and her posture relaxed. She wore a black shirt with the Dog Star logo printed across the front, the kind of shirt only true fans bought years before the band reunited. She held a lanyard in one hand and a water bottle in the other, slipping into the area as if she belonged there. Only a few people recognized the significance of her presence. Bill saw her first. His expression did not change, but he straightened slightly and walked toward her. They spoke softly, almost secretly, before she nodded, and continued past him toward the staff corridor. Those who witnessed the exchange felt the air shift. Olivia felt her phone buzz on the table. She glanced down, expecting another note about scheduling or scoring. Instead, the message made her eyebrows lift and then soften as a warm smile spread across her face. He is coming. She tapped the screen once to acknowledge it, then closed the phone. For a moment, she simply looked out at the crowd, listening to their cheers as the next band prepared to take the stage. The judges beside her noticed her expression. One judge leaned closer. "Good news." Olivia nodded. "Let us see if they are ready for a surprise." Her eyes drifted to the empty stool beside the judges, the same stool no one had used all day, the same stool marked for the anonymous guest performer. It would not be empty for long. As the afternoon sun dipped behind a line of eucalyptus trees, the amphitheater grew even more electric. The next band began their set, blending soft vocals with a gentle rock rhythm that made the crowd sway in their seats. It was a heartfelt performance full of nerves and sincerity. Yet, even as the music floated through the open air, the quiet murmurs backstage swelled into a low hum of curiosity. The woman in the Dog Star shirt slipped deeper into the maze of staff corridors, and volunteers whispered her arrival from one person to another. Some were unsure whether they had imagined seeing her at all. Others insisted she had been involved in high-profile events before. Someone claimed she was part of the security team for famous musicians. Someone else said they had seen her working at a Dog Star reunion show the previous year. Whatever the truth was, her presence told Bill everything he needed to know. He moved more quickly now, tightening cables and adjusting amps with renewed purpose. Every few moments, he glanced toward the stage as if calculating how much time was left before something significant arrived. Razor Dog, however, remained oblivious. They were too busy talking loudly among themselves, hyping up their upcoming performance. Zach bragged that he planned to jump onto one of the stage monitors during their first song for dramatic effect. Their drummer suggested throwing drumsticks into the crowd, after the set calling it a gift to their future fans. Every idea grew bigger, flashier, and more focused on spectacle rather than music. Nearby, a small group of younger musicians huddled together. They spoke in hushed voices about the strange woman who had walked through the back gate. One thought she might be a judge's assistant. Another guessed she was scouting for talent. A third quietly wondered whether the mysterious guest performer might actually be someone famous. The thought excited them and calmed their nerves at the same time. If someone legendary was coming, maybe this competition was more meaningful than they had realized. Olivia sat at the judge's table, appearing calm but increasingly alert. She tracked the movements backstage with quick, discreet glances. She noticed the volunteers whispering. She noticed the slight shift in the musicians' behavior. She noticed Bill's changing posture. Every detail added to the truth she already knew from the message on her phone. A surprise was coming. A big one, and it was getting closer by the minute. The band on stage finished their final chorus to a wave of applause. Their parents shouted from the front row. Friends held up posters with the band's name painted in colorful letters. The lead singer looked near tears as he bowed repeatedly. Olivia smiled warmly and marked encouraging comments on her score sheet, but Razor Dog reacted differently. Instead of showing respect, they clapped just loud enough to appear polite, then immediately turned back to their own conversation. Zach rolled his eyes and said the performance was cute but forgettable. His guitarist added that the audience would wake up only when Razor Dog walked out. Their arrogance did not go unnoticed. Several volunteers frowned. One judge shook his head. Olivia simply exhaled, neither angry nor sad. She knew life had a way of teaching lessons gracefully when the right moment arrived. She tapped her pen lightly against her score sheet, then glanced again at the empty stool beside her. The sunlit wood gleamed, as if waiting. The moment that would redefine the entire day was almost here. The next break between performances brought a noticeable tension to the air. It was not fear, and it was not excitement, but something in between. Volunteers paused more often than before, glancing toward the back gate as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. A few musicians leaned against the railing, whispering about the mysterious arrival they had only heard fragments about. Even the wind seemed to hush, waiting. Bill stood near the soundboard, scanning the backstage corridor with a steady patience. When his phone buzzed again, he read the message and allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. He slipped the device back into his pocket and nodded to himself, as though receiving final confirmation of something long anticipated. At the judge's table, Olivia sensed the shift. She looked at the empty stool once more, then leaned toward her fellow judges and said softly that the surprise they had been waiting for was finally about to unfold. Her tone carried both certainty and warmth. Out in the crowd, the host walked back toward the microphone, unaware of the anticipation building behind him. Razor Dog stretched lazily in the wings, still bragging about their upcoming set. They had no idea what was coming next. The backstage area had grown unusually still when the next performance break arrived. The volunteers continued working, but their movements were quieter now. Conversations softened, and even the crowd's distant noise felt muted. Something was shifting beneath the surface. Something subtle but powerful, as if the entire venue was holding its breath. At the far corner of the amphitheater, beyond the noise and the foot traffic, a side gate clicked open. A tall figure stepped through without drawing attention. He wore a simple black hoodie pulled low over his forehead, paired with faded jeans and boots that had clearly seen years of wear. No entourage followed him, no cameras, no flashy entrance, just a man arriving as quietly as the breeze. Keanu Reeves walked into the festival grounds unnoticed. He carried a worn, black bass guitar case in his right hand, its leather edges softened and cracked by time. The case looked older than many of the teenagers performing today, yet he held it with the care of someone carrying a cherished memory. His steps were slow, steady, and grounded, like someone who had spent years learning how to blend into the world instead of standing above it. The volunteers at the gate only nodded politely, assuming he was part of the production team, unaware of who he really was. Keanu gave each of them a soft smile before moving into the narrow back corridor that led toward the stage. The sounds of the crowd faded behind him, replaced by the hum of amplifiers and the slight rattle of equipment cases shifting on concrete floors. Bill spotted him first. The older sound technician had been waiting near the equipment racks, hands folded behind his back. When he saw Keanu's familiar silhouette appear, he straightened his calm expression, melting into genuine relief. Keanu lifted his hood, revealing his face fully, and Bill stepped forward to greet him with the kind of warmth you give an old friend. Keanu set down the bass case and pulled Bill into a brief, grateful embrace. "Thank you for calling me," he said softly. His voice carried the weight of sincerity, not excitement or nerves, just gratitude. Bill nodded. "I thought you should hear what is going on. The arrogance, the disrespect. These kids could use more than a lecture." Keanu chuckled gently, shaking his head. "I am not here to teach anyone a lesson. That is not my place." Bill crossed his arms, studying him for a moment. "Maybe not, but sometimes music teaches what people refuse to hear." Keanu grew quiet. He looked down at the worn bass case by his feet, his eyes softening, as if remembering something far away. "This is not about proving anything," he finally said. "It is about honoring what rock gave us, what it still gives." He lifted the case again, his fingers tracing the faded stitching along the handle. "If I play today, I want it to be for the music, not for the noise around it." Bill smiled. He had known Keanu long enough to expect that answer. Together, they walked down the backstage hallway. Every few steps, Keanu passed a young musician tuning a guitar or rehearsing a harmony quietly under their breath. None of them recognized him beneath the hoodie. To them, he was just another quiet adult weaving through the chaos. But as Keanu approached the small dressing room reserved for the mysterious guest performer, the air around him shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. His presence, even unannounced, held a calm gravity that softened the noise nearby. He slipped inside the room and closed the door behind him. Only then did he set the bass case on a small table and gently unlatch its metal clasps. Inside lay his old custom arch-top bass, the same one he had played during Dogstar's reunion tour. The dressing room was small, barely large enough for a single chair, a mirror, and a narrow table pushed against one wall. Sunlight filtered in through a high window, catching tiny specks of dust that drifted lazily in the air. It was a simple space meant for local performers, not global icons, but Keanu preferred it that way. Grand rooms made him feel distant. Quiet corners made him feel human. He lifted the arch-top bass from its case with slow, respectful hands. The polished wood had darkened over the years, carrying subtle scars from countless rehearsals and concerts. He ran his thumb gently along a blemish near the bridge, remembering the night it happened during a particularly wild encore. The memory made him smile, not because of the flaw, but because of the life the instrument had lived. Keanu sat down on the lone chair and adjusted the bass across his lap. He let the weight settle against him and rested his fingers on the strings. He did not plug it in. He did not strum. He simply held it, breathing in the familiar comfort that came with touching something that had traveled with him through so many seasons of his life. Bill entered the room quietly, closing the door behind him to shut out the distant noise of the festival. He watched Keanu for a moment, appreciating the peace in the man's posture. Most famous musicians demanded attention. Keanu absorbed the world instead. It was one of the reasons Bill had reached out to him today. They spoke softly, as if unwilling to disturb the calm of the room. Bill told him what he had seen that morning: the arrogance from Razor Dog, the ridicule, the lack of respect for the other musicians, the way their attitude had already cast a shadow over what should have been a day of celebration. He described Zach's dismissive remarks about older musicians. He explained how the boys had mocked classic rock chords and insulted volunteers who worked tirelessly to keep the festival running. Keanu listened without interrupting. His expression was thoughtful, not angry. When Bill finished, Keanu nodded slowly. "That is the thing about music," Keanu said. "When you are young, you think volume is power. But the real power is in connection, in knowing you are part of a long chain of people who gave their lives to the sound." Bill leaned against the wall. "They do not know that chain exists." Keanu looked toward the window, watching dust drift silently in the warm light. "That is why I am here. Not to embarrass them, not to show them up, just to remind them that music has roots. And if you forget the roots, the branches fall apart. Bill smiled. You always had a way of seeing it in a bigger picture. Keanu shrugged gently. Someone taught me. I am just passing it on. Their conversation paused as the sound of applause rose outside. Another band had finished performing and the crowd was reacting warmly. Keanu looked down at the bass again and brushed his fingers lightly across the strings. A soft, low hum filled the room even without amplification. It was enough to give Bill goosebumps. It was a sound that carried intention, a sound that carried history, and Keanu knew it would soon carry something more. The applause outside eventually faded, replaced by the low rumble of instruments being moved on and off the stage. Keanu set the bass gently on his lap again and tightened one of the tuning pegs with practiced ease. Each adjustment made the room feel more grounded, as if the instrument itself were preparing for something important. Bill stepped closer, watching him with the quiet admiration of someone who understood what music could do when placed in the right hands. A knock came at the door. A young volunteer peeked inside, unaware of who she was addressing. She told them that the competition was running ahead of schedule, and that the mysterious guest performer could take the stage whenever ready. Keanu thanked her with a warm smile. She blinked in confusion, sensing something familiar in his voice, but she nodded and hurried away before the realization could settle. Once the door closed, Keanu exhaled deeply, not from nerves, but from reflection. He thought about all the musicians he had met in his life, those who taught him patience, those who taught him discipline, those who taught him that music was not about being the loudest person in the room. It was about understanding the soul beneath the sound. He stood slinging the bass strap across his shoulder. The weight felt exactly right, as if it belonged there. Bill opened the door, letting the distant roar of the crowd filter into the quiet dressing room. They exchanged one final look, a silent agreement passing between them. Whatever happened next would not be about winning or proving anything. It would be about presence, about heart, about reminding everyone outside that rock was never meant to divide generations. Keanu stepped into the hallway. He was ready. Razordog exploded onto the stage with the kind of force that made the younger bands shrink back into the shadows. Their opening riff was loud enough to rattle the front rows, and Zach used every inch of the platform as if the entire competition were built around him. He sprinted across monitors, flipped his hair dramatically, and screamed lyrics into the microphone like he was headlining a national tour instead of performing at a community festival. The teens in the crowd loved it. They jumped, shouted, and pumped their fists to the beat. The parents were less impressed, but even they could not deny the band's undeniable stage presence. The drummer hammered away with impressive speed, the guitarist spun between chords with practiced flair, and their bassist stomped his foot in time with the kick drum, feeding the audience raw, unapologetic energy. Backstage, younger musicians watched with a mixture of awe and discomfort. Razordog's performance was undeniably polished, but their earlier arrogance tainted everything they did. It was like a brilliant painting hung crooked on the wall. You could not admire it fully because something felt off. Zach pushed the final chorus to its limits, nearly screaming the last line of the song before dropping to one knee and raising his fist to the sky. The guitarist shattered the silence with a final sliding note, and the amphitheater erupted in applause. Zach stood, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face, basking in the roar of approval. He turned toward the judges with a triumphant grin, convinced he had cemented their victory. Olivia clapped, but her expression remained unreadable. The other judges offered polite applause as well, though none of them seemed swept away by the performance as Zach hoped. Zach approached the front of the stage and held his arms out as if welcoming praise. "Thank you, Santa Cruz. Remember this moment. You just witnessed the future of rock." The crowd cheered again, but this time a few murmurs wove through the applause. Some of the older spectators exchanged puzzled looks, as if wondering whether confidence had crossed into something else entirely. Olivia leaned forward, adjusting her microphone. She waited until the crowd quieted, then spoke with a calm, steady tone that contrasted sharply with the energy Razordog had just unleashed. "You played with fire." The crowd gasped at her words. but would you dare light it next to someone with real history? The musicians backstage froze. Even the volunteers paused mid-step. Zach blinked at her, unsure whether he had heard correctly. He let out a short laugh. Like who? Mick Jagger's ghost. A few people in the audience chuckled, but Olivia did not smile. She held his gaze with quiet conviction. A second judge leaned in toward the microphone. "We have a guest performer scheduled next. If you are so confident, would you jam against him?" The amphitheater reacted instantly. Gasps, whispers, and scattered cheers rippled through the seats. Teens grabbed their phones. Parents squinted at the judges' table, trying to understand what was unfolding. Zach smirked. The expression grew slowly, spreading across his face, like a spark turning into a flame. "Bring it on," he said, raising the microphone again. Rock has no past. He believed the challenge would only elevate him further. He had no idea what stood waiting behind the curtains. The moment Zach accepted the challenge, the atmosphere in the amphitheater shifted. The crowd leaned forward. Some teenagers cheered at the idea of Razor Dog showing off even more. Others sensed something deeper stirring beneath the judge's words. A whisper spread through the seats, rising and falling like a wave. A guest performer. Someone with history. Someone worth challenging. Razor Dog left their instruments on the stands and strutted toward the edge of the stage as if gearing up for a victory lap. Their drummer flexed his wrists, already imagining how he would dominate whatever jam came next. Their guitarist shook out his arms and told Zach they would crush whoever stepped onto the stage. The bassist laughed and said the judges were about to regret giving them more time under the spotlight. Backstage, however, whispers carried a different tone. Younger bands exchanged curious looks, wondering who had accepted the judge's invitation. Volunteers moved quickly, adjusting cables and clearing pathways, though many of them paused to glance toward the quiet dressing room at the end of the hallway. Even those who did not know the full truth felt something significant unfolding. Olivia sat back in her chair and exhaled slowly. She kept her expression neutral so as not to influence the crowd too soon, but inside she felt a sense of anticipation she had not experienced in years. She had judged dozens of competitions, watched thousands of young musicians grow, and listened to countless bands fight for recognition. Yet today felt different. Today felt bigger. The second judge leaned closer to her. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Absolutely," Olivia whispered. "If they think rock has no past, it is time they feel the weight of its roots." On stage, Zach twirled the microphone cable around his fingers. He scanned the judges, then the wings of the stage, trying to identify who might be bold enough to face him. Every second that passed without an answer only inflated his ego further. "Come on," he shouted toward the crowd. "Who is this mystery legend? Did you dig someone out of retirement?" A few teens laughed. Some older spectators frowned. "Marlon." The event host jogged back onto the stage. He looked from the judges to Razor Dog with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "it seems our special guest has accepted the invitation." His voice lifted with genuine awe. "Please stay seated. What you are about to see is not part of the original program." The audience roared, some cheering, some confused, all hungry to see what would happen next. Zach paced like a caged animal waiting for a challenger. He cracked his knuckles and nodded at his bandmates. "When the guest steps out, you follow my lead," he said. "No mercy." His bassist snorted. "This guy is probably 80. We will go easy on him." The volunteers, who overheard that remark, exchanged looks of disbelief. Razor Dog understood nothing, not humility, not history, not the gift that was about to step on stage. Behind the curtains, the final preparations were underway. Bill whispered instructions to a technician adjusting the stage monitors. 2 staff members cleared a path from the dressing room to the center ramp. The woman in the dog star shirt stepped into position near the stage entrance, speaking quietly into her headset. Every movement backstage radiated purpose, though Razor Dog remained completely unaware. They still thought the challenge was a game. They had not yet learned it was a moment that would define them, a moment that would change everything. The stage lights dimmed slightly as Marlon stepped back, giving space for the unseen guest performer to make their entrance. The audience fell into an unsettled hush, the kind of silence that comes not from fear, but from anticipation. It rolled through the amphitheater like a slow breath, pulling every gaze toward the wings of the stage. Razordog remained front and center, still convinced they were moments away from an easy victory lap. Zach raised the microphone again and shouted toward the wings. "Whoever you are, come on out." "Rock has no age limit, right?" His voice echoed through the speakers, dripping with the bravado he wore like armor. The crowd reacted with a mix of cheers and uneasy murmurs. Something about the moment felt bigger than Zach realized. Backstage, the final signals were given. Bill positioned himself near the stage ramp, arms crossed lightly, watching the doorway with calm expectancy. Olivia leaned forward at the judges' table, hands folded, eyes bright with the knowledge of what was about to unfold. The empty stool beside her remained untouched, as though saving its seat for someone who did not need introductions. A technician nodded at the woman in the Dogstar shirt. She pressed a button on her headset and whispered, "He is ready." A soft, warm light illuminated the backstage entrance. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a single shadow appeared on the floor, stretching slowly across the curtain. It was unhurried, steady, grounded. A silhouette that carried presence without needing volume. A murmur rippled through the crowd, rising higher and sharper with every passing second. Zach leaned forward, squinting into the lights. His smirk flickered just slightly. Because the person stepping toward the stage did not move like a retiree. He moved like someone the world already knew. The moment the shadow stretched across the curtain, the amphitheater shifted into a silence so complete that even the wind seemed to pause. Teenagers leaned over the rails, eyes fixed on the stage entrance. Parents lowered their phones, suddenly sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. The lights above the audience dimmed slowly, leaving only the faint glow of the backstage ramp. A single soft bass note rumbled through the speakers. It was subtle, almost too gentle to be intentional, yet it carried a depth that reached through the silence like a hand pulling everyone's attention inward. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Razordog spun toward the source of the sound, expecting an old, worn-out musician to shuffle into the spotlight. What stepped into view was none of that. Keanu Reeves emerged from behind the curtain with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the power of stillness. He walked at an unhurried pace, the hood of his black sweatshirt resting behind him, now revealing his calm face under the warm glow of a single spotlight. His jeans were worn, his boots scuffed, but the bass guitar in his hands gleamed beneath the stage lights, polished and unmistakably loved. The crowd reacted first with confusion. A few whispered to each other, squinting as though their eyes might be tricking them. Then someone near the front row gasped. A second later, the recognition spread like a spark racing through dry grass. "Is that Keanu Reeves?" The whisper repeated itself in waves. "No way. Dogstar. John Wick. That is actually him." The entire amphitheater seemed to inhale at once. Phones shot into the air. Parents looked at their teenagers with stunned expressions. Even the judges sat straighter, as if suddenly aware they were witnessing something that would be remembered far beyond this small festival. Backstage, the younger band stared in open disbelief. Some covered their mouths. Some grabbed their friends' shoulders. For them, this was more than a surprise. It was surreal. And Razordog felt it too. Zach froze the microphone, dangling loosely in his hand. His smirk flickered confusion creeping into his expression. His bandmates looked at him for a cue, but Zach had none to give. He was caught between amazement and panic, unsure whether he should laugh or step back in awe. Keanu stopped at center stage, planted his feet calmly, and lowered his head in a respectful nod to the crowd. The bass hung comfortably against his torso, as if it were an extension of him rather than an instrument he carried. He looked at Zach not with intimidation or challenge, but with gentle acknowledgement. Zach swallowed hard. The weight of the moment pulled at him from all angles. He had bragged loudly about beating anyone, even a legend. Now the legend stood in front of him, not with fireworks or spectacle, but with humility so powerful it made Zach's confidence wobble. Keanu lifted his chin slightly toward Razor Dog's drummer. His voice when he spoke carried across the amphitheater with a quiet strength. "I will not fight you. I will play with you." The words softened something in the air. It was not a challenge. It was an invitation. Zach stared at him, caught off guard by the simplicity of the offer. He expected arrogance. He expected a boast. He expected a battle. Instead, Keanu gave him grace. The drummer looked at Zach waiting. The guitarist waited. The crowd waited. Even the judges leaned forward, breath held. Zach hesitated. Then slowly he nodded. The nod from Zach was small, almost reluctant, but it was enough to send a ripple through the amphitheater. The audience exploded into whispers. Some cheered. Some held their breath in disbelief. Even Marlon, the host, looked between Zach and Keanu as if he could not quite believe what he was witnessing. Keanu stepped closer to the band, his movement steady and grounded. There was no ego, no swagger, no demand for attention, yet his presence was impossible to ignore. Calm radiated from him in a way that softened the energy Razor Dog had stirred earlier. Even the air seemed to settle around him. Razor Dog's drummer gripped his sticks tighter, suddenly aware that this was not just another rehearsal or performance. This was something he might remember for the rest of his life. The guitarist adjusted his strap nervously. The bassist kept glancing between Keanu and Zach, unsure whether to grin or run. Zach, however, stood like a statue. He searched Keanu's face, trying to decipher what the older musician wanted from him. Yet Keanu's expression revealed nothing but kindness. It made Zach uneasy in a way arrogance never prepared him for. Keanu nodded once more to the drummer and stepped toward the center of the stage. The spotlight followed him, widening slightly, as if giving him room to breathe. The bass in his hands looked like it belonged there, resting against him with the familiarity of an old friend. The crowd leaned forward as Keanu tested a string with a light pull of his finger. The note hummed through the amplifiers, low and warm, sending a shiver through the amphitheater. The sound was not loud, it was not flashy, but it was controlled, confident, deep. A note from someone who had lived enough life to understand restraint. Razor Dog felt the difference immediately. Their drummer swallowed a lump in his throat and tapped the sticks together slowly. His hands felt heavier than usual. Their guitarist adjusted his stance to match Keanu's tempo, his earlier bravado replaced with a sudden need to keep up. Their bassist shifted nervously, trying not to stare too long at the man beside him. Zach forced himself to step forward. The crowd cheered his movement, but he sensed the shift in their enthusiasm. They were no longer cheering for his confidence. They were waiting to see how he would respond to the presence beside him. He raised the microphone to his mouth. His voice trembled, barely noticeable, but enough for the judges and the nearby musicians to hear. "So, you want to jam with us?" Keanu offered a gentle smile. "Only if you want to." The simplicity of the answer disarmed Zach. For a moment, he did not know how to speak. Keanu had not challenged him. He had not mocked him. He had not tried to overshadow him. Instead, he had offered partnership. It was the one thing Zach had not prepared for. The drummer looked at Zach anxiously, waiting for direction. The guitarist tried to catch his eye. The bassist nudged him with an elbow, whispering something too soft for the crowd to hear. Zach's face tightened as he grappled with the moment. Half the audience stared at him, expecting arrogance. The other half watched Keanu, sensing something profound emerging. Zach exhaled slowly. He lowered the microphone and gave the smallest, most hesitant nod of his life. "We will play," he said, "but do not expect us to go easy." Keanu simply lifted his bass and replied, "That is the spirit." The crowd erupted as soon as Zach agreed. The sound rolled through the amphitheater, like a wave rising and breaking into cheers that filled every corner of the venue. No one could believe what they were witnessing. A youth rock band, bold and brash, had just accepted a jam challenge with Keanu Reeves himself. Parents shook their heads in stunned laughter. Teenagers screamed with excitement. Even the volunteers backstage grinned as they exchanged knowing looks. Keanu stood calmly in the center of the stage, letting the applause wash over the moment without letting it change him. Humility radiated from him the way adrenaline radiated from the boys behind him. He waited until the crowd settled, then turned his head slightly toward Razor Dog's drummer. A small nod was all it took. The drummer raised his sticks, suddenly aware that hundreds of eyes were watching him more closely than ever before. His heart pounded in his ears, his palms dampened against the wood. But beneath the nerves, he felt something unfamiliar. Respect, not fear. Respect for the man beside him and for the music they were about to create together. Keanu shifted his grip on the bass. The stage lights softened into a focused spotlight that framed his silhouette in warm, golden tones. He inhaled slowly, grounding himself in the moment, then looked toward Zach with the same gentle expression he had worn since appearing on stage. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. Zach hesitated, breathing shallow ego trembling under the weight of the unexpected, yet somewhere deep inside he felt a pull, the pull of a real musician facing a real moment. He lifted his chin. "Yeah," he said, "let us do it." Keanu smiled the kind of smile that could calm a storm. Then the stage fell into silence, waiting for the first note. The amphitheater held its breath as Razor Dog took their positions again, this time not as competitors ready to dominate, but as musicians standing shoulder to shoulder with someone far beyond their world. The silence deepened until the smallest movements felt amplified. Zach tightened his grip on the microphone. The guitarist steadied his stance. The bassist wiped his palms against his jeans. Their drummer closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with a seriousness that had never been there before. Keanu stood at the center of it all, still, and grounded the bass resting against him with effortless familiarity. The spotlight framing him flickered ever so slightly as if preparing for the moment itself. Then it happened. The drummer lifted his sticks and struck the snare with a sharp, clean roll that sliced through the silence like a blade. The sound cracked across the amphitheater with such clarity that even those in the back rows straightened in their seats. The roll surged forward into a tight, rhythmic pulse, the kind that demanded attention and refused to let the energy slip away. The guitarist jumped in next. He launched into the opening riff of "Killing in the Name," the iconic progression hitting the air with raw electricity. The crowd erupted instantly. Hands shot upward, teens screamed. Adults who had grown up with the song clapped with renewed excitement. Even the judges exchanged looks of surprise as the stage filled with a sound that pulsed through the floor. Keanu waited. He listened to the tempo. He studied the cadence. He let the younger musicians set the pace, giving them the space to breathe, to claim the moment, to feel ownership over the first few bars. Then he stepped in. His first note did not just join the music, it transformed it. A deep, thunderous bass riff surged from his fingertips, powerful and controlled, rich with a weight that came from years of experience. It cut through the air with such force that the audience gasped before erupting again. The vibration traveled through the amphitheater in a wave that rolled across the seats, down the aisles, and even backstage. Razor Dog felt it too. The guitarist's eyes widened. The drummer faltered for half a heartbeat before tightening his rhythm again. The bassist looked at Keanu like someone seeing a new definition of the instrument he thought he understood. Zach raised the microphone, ready to shout the opening line. But the moment he opened his mouth, his voice caught in his throat. He was not intimidated by the volume. He was stunned by the depth. Keanu was not overwhelming them. He was elevating them. His bass did not overshadow their sound. It fused with it, lifting every note higher, giving their song a new dimension they had never reached before. Zach tried again, managing to push out the first few words, though they trembled slightly. Keanu adjusted his playing in an instant, adding support to Zach's voice, rather than competing with it. The guitarist felt it too, and shifted his chords to mesh more tightly with the bass. The drummer steadied, leaning into the rhythm with newfound focus. The music changed. It stopped sounding like Razor Dog trying to prove something. It stopped sounding like a legend stepping in to steal the spotlight. It became something else. A bridge between generations, a collaboration instead of a battle, a jam that belonged to all of them, and the crowd felt it immediately. The amphitheater shook with the sound of the jam as it deepened into something raw and alive. Killing in the Name had been played thousands of times by thousands of musicians, but never like this. There was something different in the way Razor Dog and Keanu moved together, something unplanned yet effortlessly cohesive. It was as if the song had been waiting for this exact moment to breathe in a new way. Keanu's bass lines pulsed with power, but the notes he chose were intentional. He threaded them through the guitarist's riff and the drummer's beat, adding texture without overshadowing. Every vibration carried warmth instead of dominance. Every shift in rhythm felt like a hand pulling the younger musicians upward, not pushing them aside. For the first time that day, Razor Dog felt their own music expand beyond what they thought possible. The guitarist looked down at his hands in disbelief as the chords he had practiced 100 times suddenly came alive with new energy. He leaned into the strings harder, matching Keanu's weight, and felt something spark inside him. It felt like purpose. It felt like truth. The drummer followed suit, tightening his snare hits and adjusting the pace to sync with Keanu's breathing, not just his own internal clock. His sticks danced across the kit, guided by instinct rather than ego. He felt less like a boy trying to impress a crowd, and more like a musician speaking the same language as someone he admired. The bassist standing closest to Keanu felt the deepest shift of all. He had spent years mimicking famous lines without understanding their meaning. But as he watched Keanu's fingers travel across the strings with precision and emotion, he understood the difference between playing notes and channeling them. His jaw tightened with awe. His hands steadied. For the first time, his bass blended instead of clashed. And Zach, who had never questioned his own confidence, suddenly felt small in the best possible way. He raised the microphone again, this time without theatrics. His voice entered the mix carefully. At first, it wavered, but Keanu adjusted his bass again, nudging the melody upward, giving Zach space to find control. The crowd noticed. They cheered louder when Zach finally hit his stride, not because he dominated the song, but because he adapted to it. His voice carried less ego and more grit. He was no longer performing above the music. He was part of it. Something in Zach's chest cracked open, not in defeat but in realization. He had believed dominance was the only way to prove strength. But standing next to Keanu, he felt the strange and humbling truth. Real strength did not need to shout. Real strength lifted others. The audience felt the evolution as the jam escalated. People rose from their seats clapping in rhythm. Some danced. Some shouted lyrics into the air. Even the older attendees who had been skeptical of Razor Dog earlier now watched with soft smiles. They understood what was happening. They had seen this kind of moment before. A young band opening its heart in real time. Backstage, Olivia pressed her hand to her chest without meaning to. She whispered something to the judge beside her, who could only nod, unable to look away. This was no longer entertainment. It was transformation. The jam surged toward its peak, carrying the entire amphitheater with it. Keanu shifted into a deeper, heavier bass groove, weaving new patterns into the familiar structure of the song. The guitarist followed instinctively, his chords growing bolder, sharper, more expressive. The drummer locked into a driving rhythm, his sticks moving so fast they blurred beneath the lights. The bassist leaned closer, matching Keanu's flow with a steadiness he had never tapped into before. Zach stepped forward again, gripping the microphone with both hands. This time, his voice rose not from arrogance, but from adrenaline and connection. He belted the refrain with a rawness that surprised even him. The crowd roared in response, sensing the shift in him as clearly as they sensed the music vibrating under their feet. Keanu glanced at each band member one by one, ensuring they stayed with him. He was not leading them. He was guiding them. He was holding a door open and inviting them through. By the time the jam reached its final stretch, the entire amphitheater had become a single, united pulse. Parents who once frowned now clapped along. Teens who had come only for Razor Dog now chanted the rhythm of Keanu's improvised lines. Even the volunteers, tired from their long day, found themselves smiling uncontrollably. Then, with a subtle motion of his hand, Keanu brought the intensity down. The drummer softened. The guitarist slid into a lower register. The bassist eased off the strings. Zach lowered the microphone, slowly breathing hard. Keanu finished with one last resonant note, letting it hum through the amphitheater until it faded into complete silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then the crowd exploded. The jam had ended, but something far more powerful had just begun. The final note of the jam hovered in the air, like smoke shimmering over the amphitheater before dissolving into absolute stillness. It was the kind of silence that did not come from absence, but from awe. Hundreds of people stared at the stage as if unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. Razor Dog stood frozen in place, chests heaving, sweat dripping, eyes wide. Keanu remained at the center, shoulders, relaxed bass hanging against him like part of his own body. Then the first phone went into the air. Then another. Then 100 more. Every teenager who had doubted the moment now scrambled to capture it. Screens lit up the rows. Someone shouted the words, "Keanu Reeves just jammed with Razor Dog." Another yelled for friends to start a live stream. A ripple of excitement passed through the audience, turning disbelief into electric energy. Within seconds, social media feeds lit up with short clips, shaky videos, and stunned commentary. The hashtag #KeanuRocks appeared on one screen in the third row. By the time someone pointed it out, the hashtag had already begun climbing in real time. Parents in the crowd cheered louder than the teenagers. Some stood on their chairs. Some cupped their hands around their mouths and shouted his name like they were cheering for the singer of their own youth. A woman in her 40s wiped tears from her eyes, saying softly that she never thought she would see something like this again. A man beside her held his phone tightly, shaking his head in disbelief as he recorded the stage. The generational shift was unmistakable. For the first time all day, teenagers were not the loudest. The parents were. The older fans were. The people who had once blasted rock music from car stereos and garage speakers now felt something in their chest reopen. They remembered who they had been before life rushed them forward. They remembered the songs they used to scream at night when dreams were bigger than fear. And Zach saw all of it. He watched the older fans cry. He watched fathers gripping their teen sons' shoulders, saying that was the kind of music that raised them. He watched mothers covering their mouths as if the moment itself cracked something inside them that had been silent for years. He looked out at these people with a kind of stunned confusion. He had lived his entire short life believing rock belonged to him and kids like him. Now he saw it stretching far beyond him, reaching backward through time, touching people who had lived whole lives before he even learned to play his first chord. A girl near the front row turned to her boyfriend, her eyes still fixed on Keanu. "This is real music," she whispered. "You feel it. You do not just hear it." More phones went up. More people shouted Keanu's name. The amphitheater felt like a living, breathing thing, pulsing with gratitude and wonder. For the first time since entering the stage, Keanu lifted his right hand. Not in victory, not in triumph, just a quiet gesture of peace. His fingers curled slightly as if to calm the storm of applause building around him. The spotlight softened above him. The stage dimmed. His silhouette faded gently into the darkness, and the silence that followed felt sacred. The silence stretched for only a heartbeat before the amphitheater erupted with a force that shook the rafters. It was not polite applause. It was not admiration offered from a distance. It was a thunderous, rising roar that came from deep within every person who had witnessed the moment. The audience surged to their feet in a standing ovation so loud that the stage monitors vibrated. Razor Dog stared out at the sea of cheering faces, stunned by the scale of the response. Zach felt the sound wash over him like a tide he could not fight. The applause did not feel like praise for him. It felt like gratitude for something older, deeper, and bigger than any one band. He looked at Keanu, who had lowered his hand again and now stood quietly with his bass held against him. Keanu did not bow. He did not raise his arms. He simply accepted the applause with the same gentle humility he had brought to the stage from the beginning. The crowd chanted his name. Some cried openly. Parents shouted for their kids to keep recording because this was history. Teenagers who had barely known Dogstar before today now screamed as though they had grown up with the music. Even the volunteers backstage were clapping their faces, glowing with admiration and relief. Keanu stepped back from the center of the stage, letting Razor Dog move forward into the spotlight. He wanted the applause to reach them too. The bassist was the first to notice. He looked at Keanu with wide eyes, realizing the gesture. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Zach stepped beside him. The guitarist followed. The drummer rose from his seat and joined them at the front edge of the stage. The crowd's applause shifted. It did not lessen, but it changed shape, acknowledging the young musicians as well. This time, the cheers felt warmer, less frantic, more encouraging. It was the kind of applause that told a person they were growing, not failing. Zach swallowed hard as he scanned the audience. His eyes caught a middle-aged man with streaks of gray in his beard wiping tears from his eyes. A woman beside him held a hand to her heart. A group of older fans near the left section hugged each other, laughing through tears, as if the jam had returned them to some long-forgotten summer night from their youth. Zach felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, not embarrassment, something tender, something he had not expected. He looked again at Keanu, who watched the crowd with the quiet calm of someone who knew this reaction had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with connection. Keanu glanced back at Zach with a small, encouraging nod. No words, just a gesture that carried deep meaning. The spotlight dimmed even more, signaling the end of the moment. Shadows stretched across the stage, the crowd sensing the closing of something sacred, quieted once more. Then, as if guided by instinct, the entire amphitheater rose into one final, thunderous ovation. It was not for victory, it was not for pride, it was for unity. The standing ovation continued long after the final note faded, rolling over the amphitheater in waves that felt almost physical. Razor Dog remained at the front of the stage, overwhelmed by the sound, but Zach stood the stillest among them. His eyes stayed fixed on the crowd, on the faces lit with emotion, on the older fans wiping tears from their cheeks. He had expected applause. He had expected praise. He had expected triumph. But this was nothing like what he imagined. This was not applause for dominance. This was gratitude for connection. And Zach knew the difference. A shaking breath slipped from him as he lowered the microphone to his side. The roaring crowd began to settle, not because their excitement faded, but because something else was happening, something quieter and more intimate than cheering. Zach turned slowly toward Keanu. The man stood a few steps back, relaxed, calm hands resting lightly on his bass. He was not soaking in the applause. He was not reveling in the moment. He was simply present, watching Razor Dog with a gentle expression that felt strangely comforting. It was an expression Zach had not seen often in adults, a look that said he was not being judged. Something inside Zach broke. His breath hitched almost unnoticeably, but enough for the band members beside him to glance over with concern. His fingers tightened around the microphone, and before he realized what he was doing, his feet carried him toward Keanu. Each step felt heavy, weighted with embarrassment, realization, and something he could not yet name. The crowd quieted even more. A hush washed over the amphitheater, soft as falling dust. Zach stopped in front of Keanu. His voice trembled as he lifted the microphone with both hands. For a moment, no sound came out. He swallowed hard, eyes darting between Keanu and the sea of faces watching him. He took another breath. Then the words finally came. I was wrong. The sentence cracked through the amphitheater with a rawness that silenced even the whispers. The band behind him froze. The judges leaned forward. The volunteers backstage stopped mid-step. Zach's voice shook as he continued. Rock has no age. It is a feeling, not a face. His eyes filled with tears, he tried desperately to blink away. He turned his head slightly toward the crowd, letting them see the vulnerability he had always kept hidden beneath his arrogance. His voice softened. I thought music was about being the best, being the loudest, being the future. He looked back at Keanu and his expression collapsed into honesty. But you did not beat us. You saved us from our own arrogance. The amphitheater remained still, listening to every word as if each carried the weight of truth they had all hoped the band would one day learn. Keanu's expression warmed. He nodded slowly, stepping closer until they were only inches apart. He did not take the microphone. He did not interrupt. He simply met Zach's eyes with the kind of understanding that could quiet a storm. "We are all still learning," Keanu whispered. The words struck the boy harder than any critique ever could. Zach's shoulders shook. The microphone lowered from his hands, as though he no longer had the strength to hold it. And then, finally, he broke. Tears spilled down his cheeks fast and uncontrollable. The moment Zach's tears fell, something shifted across the entire amphitheater. It was as if his vulnerability spread outward, softening the edges of every person watching. The crowd that had roared minutes earlier now stood in tender, reverent silence. Razor Dog's guitarist lowered his head, ashamed of every time he had echoed Zach's arrogance. The bassist wiped his sleeve across his eyes. Even the drummer, who had prided himself on never showing emotion, stared at the stage floor with trembling lips. Zach tried to speak again, but his voice cracked. His breath shook as he lifted a hand to his face, embarrassed by the collapse of his own bravado. Yet the more he tried to contain it, the more the emotion pushed through. His chest heaved with the weight of the truth he had buried beneath years of insecurity, disguised as confidence. Keanu did not move at first. He simply watched the boy with steady eyes, giving him space to feel the moment fully. Then gently he stepped forward and rested his hand on Zach's shoulder. The touch was quiet, almost fatherly, and it steadied Zach instantly. His sobs quieted. His breathing slowed. Keanu leaned in just slightly and spoke with warmth that carried far beyond the two of them. "You did good," he said. "Every musician has this moment. This is where you start to grow." Zach let out a shuddering breath. His fingers curled into the fabric of his jeans as he tried to regain control. The crowd remained completely still, sensing the significance of the exchange happening before them. Keanu opened his arms just enough for Zach to understand the invitation. Zach's face crumpled with relief. He stepped forward and leaned into Keanu's embrace. It was not the desperate hug of a child, but the honest, heavy hug of someone who finally understood the magnitude of their own mistakes. The audience exhaled collectively. A few people wiped their eyes. A middle-aged man in the third row nodded slowly, as if remembering his own years of youthful arrogance. A group of teenagers who had once idolized Razor Dog now watched with softened expressions, absorbing the lesson without needing it spelled out. Keanu held Zach for a few seconds, just long enough to give him the strength to stand on his own again. When they parted, Zach wiped the last of his tears and looked out at the crowd. He no longer saw them as fans to impress. He saw them as people. People who loved music. People who understood growth. Keanu stepped back and placed a hand over his heart. "The learning never stops," he said softly. The amphitheater erupted again, not with wild screams, but with applause that felt like support. Zach stood taller. He was not the same boy he had been when the day began. When the concert finally ended and the crowd dispersed into the warm Santa Cruz night, nobody realized what had already begun. The moment Keanu stepped off stage, the internet lit up like a struck match. Teenagers uploaded shaky clips of the jam they had recorded from the stands. Parents posted emotional captions about seeing their youth come alive again. Band kids who had been backstage rushed to share the experience before anyone else could. Every angle of the jam appeared online within minutes. One video filmed from the left aisle with a clear view of Keanu's face as he joined Razor Dog shot upward instantly. The title someone gave it was "Simple but Sharp." Keanu Reeves silently destroys arrogance with a bass riff. The thumbnail showed Keanu stepping into the spotlight with his bass strapped across his chest, eyes focused, calm, and determined. Within 10 minutes, the video had thousands of views. Within an hour, it had jumped to hundreds of thousands. Before the amphitheater's lights had fully shut off, it had crossed 1 million. Comments poured in so quickly that the original uploader could not keep up. Some were from teenagers who had been at the event, shouting in disbelief that they had witnessed something magical. Others came from older fans who had followed Dogstar during their early years. Musicians from all corners of the internet chimed in praising Keanu's technique and his humility. Many wrote that the jam reminded them why they picked up an instrument in the first place. By midnight, elderly musicians began posting their own comeback videos. One gray-haired man in his 70s uploaded a clip of himself playing a fierce blues solo in his garage with the caption, "If Keanu can bring rock back to life, so can I." The video quickly filled with thousands of encouraging comments. Another older woman uploaded a clip of herself strumming a classic rock tune she had not played since high school. Her smile glowed with the same excitement she once carried as a teenager. Younger viewers applauded her bravery, flooding her page with encouragement. Music stores across the country noticed a surge almost immediately. Their online orders spiked. Messages from teenagers poured in, asking about beginner bass guitars, vintage styles, and classic rigs. Some stores reported selling out of several bass models overnight. One employee at a small shop in Ohio filmed himself surrounded by empty racks where the bass guitars had been earlier that morning. He shook his head laughing and said he had never seen anything like it. Even professional musicians began reacting. Some posted breakdowns of the jam isolating Keanu's bass lines frame by frame. Others applauded the beauty of a legend lifting up a youth band instead of overshadowing them. A guitarist with millions of followers summarized it best. "This was not about skill, it was about soul." And then one tweet rose above the rest. It came from a jazz pianist known for his thoughtful music commentary. His message spread across platforms almost instantly. He wrote, "Keanu just reminded the world that humility makes the loudest noise." The tweet was shared tens of thousands of times in its first hour. As the tweet spread, news outlets began to notice. Music blogs picked up the story, first posting headlines that blended disbelief with excitement. Articles appeared with titles like "Keanu Reeves revives rock at a youth festival and actor to icon Keanu reminds the world what music feels like." By morning, larger publications joined in. They featured still frames from the jam showing Keanu's calm expression beside the stunned faces of Razor Dog. Each article captured a different angle, but the message was always the same. Something remarkable had happened. Clips of Zach's confession spread even faster. Viewers were struck by the honesty in his voice and the sincerity in his apology. People praised him for admitting his mistake in front of a massive crowd. Parents shared the moment with their children, saying it was what humility looked like. Teachers played the clip in classrooms, using it as an example of emotional maturity. Commenters online wrote paragraphs celebrating Zach's courage, calling it a turning point for young musicians everywhere. The transformation of Razor Dog became a talking point. Their social media pages, once filled with bragging photos and edgy slogans, suddenly overflowed with encouragement from fans of all ages. Messages came in from older musicians telling them they had potential. Teenagers praised their willingness to grow. Parents thanked them for allowing their children to witness humility in action. Instead of being mocked for their earlier arrogance, they were celebrated for embracing something bigger than their pride. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed silent. He posted nothing. He said nothing. But his silence only made the world love the moment more. Fans pointed out that he was not trying to reclaim fame or prove himself. He had simply shown up, shared his music with a group of young players, and walked away. People admired that quiet strength. They admired the way he lifted Razor Dog instead of overwhelming them. They admired how he treated a youth competition with the same respect he brought to film sets and concert stages. Musicians around the world began covering "Killing in the Name," using Keanu's improvised bass line as the centerpiece. Some recreated the jam exactly. Others built new layers on top of it, turning it into something entirely their own. Music teachers filmed their students learning the riff in class. Marching bands practiced versions of it for halftime shows. Families gathered around living room speakers replaying the moment and talking about how music could bridge generations. Bass guitar searches skyrocketed. Online lessons saw sudden spikes in registrations. Instrument stores could not keep up with the demand. Several independent luthiers posted that they were receiving orders from teenagers who said they wanted to learn bass because of Keanu. A few even asked if they could build replicas of his custom arch-top model. By the end of the day, it was clear the moment had become more than a viral trend. It had become a movement. A reminder that music, when shared with humility, could echo far beyond the stage. A full week passed after the unforgettable night in Santa Cruz, yet the echo of the jam continued to ripple through the world. Concert clips were still trending. Music stores were restocking bass guitars as quickly as they could. Razor Dog's fan base had doubled, and Keanu, despite all the attention, returned to his quiet routines. He spent his mornings reading, his afternoons practicing, and his evenings walking around his neighborhood, unnoticed beneath his hoodie. He had not thought much about what happened at the youth festival. For him, it was simply a moment of connection, a chance to uplift a group of young musicians who needed direction more than applause. He remembered Zach's tears. He remembered the strength it took for the boy to admit his mistakes. And he remembered the way the younger musicians grew in front of him, minute by minute, like flowers finally receiving sunlight. Still, Keanu moved on with humility. The world could celebrate. He would stay grounded. On a quiet morning in Los Angeles, a small brown package arrived on his porch. It carried no fancy wrapping, no company logo, no formal label. Just a simple handwritten note across the top with his name, Keanu Reeves. The handwriting was uneven, the kind belonging to someone who had rewritten the label 3 times before finally letting it be. Keanu carried the package into his home studio and set it on an old wooden table beside a stack of music sheets. Sunlight filtered through the window, falling across the room where shelves of instruments lined the walls. His old Dog Star poster hung above his main desk, slightly faded but full of memories. He opened the package gently. Inside was a folded band tee, black. The Razor Dog logo printed across the front in bold red. But what caught Keanu immediately were the signatures across the fabric. The guitarist had written his name with doodles of lightning bolts. The bassist added a small drawing of a bass guitar with wings. The drummer signed with his nickname, looping the letters in a swirl. At the top, written larger than the others, was Zach's name. Beneath the shirt was a letter folded neatly, edges worn from nervous handling. Keanu unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was messy, words scratched out, misspellings corrected, but every sentence carried heart. Keanu, you made us better musicians, but more than that, better people. The next lines came shakier. I thought rock was about being loud, about being the future, about proving everyone wrong. But that day you showed us it was about listening, feeling, connecting, and giving something to the crowd instead of taking from it. Keanu read on, his eyes softening. Thank you for not embarrassing me. Thank you for not making fun of us. Thank you for giving me the chance to grow. You saved me from becoming someone I would have hated later. Zach ended the letter with one final line. You changed my life by playing one song with me. Keanu lowered the paper for a moment, letting the weight of the words settle. He felt a warmth in his chest, the quiet kind that did not shout for recognition. He looked at the shirt again and ran his thumb gently across the signatures. A memory flickered inside him of his own youth of musicians who had lifted him up when he was still figuring out who he wanted to be. He knew what it meant for a young person to feel seen, to feel forgiven, to feel guided. He breathed in deeply. Then he reached for a frame. Keanu placed the Razor Dog shirt carefully inside the wooden frame, smoothing the fabric with the same gentle precision he used when restringing a guitar. The black cotton rested against the clean, backing the bright red logo standing out boldly. The signatures felt young and chaotic, filled with energy and truth. He tightened the frame's corners, lifted it, and studied the finished piece for a long moment. It felt right to honor it. Not because it celebrated him, but because it captured a moment of change. He walked across the room and hung the frame beside his old Dog Star poster. The two pieces of his life sat side by side, one representing the early years when he played simply for the joy of sound, and the other representing a moment where that joy had helped someone else grow. They looked connected like chapters written by the same hand years apart. Keanu stepped back and let out a slow breath. The studio felt different now, not louder, not brighter, simply fuller, as if the room had absorbed the emotion from the letter folded on his desk. He sat down, reached for a pen, and pulled a small sheet of thick, cream-colored paper toward him. Handwritten notes mattered. They carried weight. They showed intention. He thought about Zach as he began to write. Not the arrogant boy on stage at the start of the festival, but the young man who had found the courage to apologize in front of hundreds of people. The young man who had cried without shame. The young man who had chosen growth over pride. Keanu wrote slowly, letting the message come naturally. Zach, thank you for the letter and the shirt. It means more than you know. Music guides us if we let it. Keep playing, and listen louder than you speak. He paused, reading the words again. They carried the message he wanted to leave behind. Not instruction, not critique. Guidance. He added one more line. You are on the right path. Keanu signed his name at the bottom, folded the paper neatly, and slipped it into an envelope. On the front, he wrote the band's rehearsal address that Zach had included on the package return label. He sealed the envelope and placed it near the door so he could mail it on his way out later. Before leaving the studio, he glanced once more at the frame shirt. It hung proudly, carrying the weight of a moment that would stay with him for years. A quiet smile crossed his face. Growth had come full circle, and it felt beautiful. The week after Keanu received Zach's package, Razor Dog entered a new chapter without even meaning to. Their rehearsals felt different now. The room that once echoed with ego and noise was filled with focus. Instead of arguing over solos, they listened to each other. Instead of trying to outplay one another, they discussed emotion, rhythm, and meaning. It felt strange at first, but good. A quiet maturity settled between them, something deeper than the confidence they once projected. It was Zach who said it first. We should write something new, something that shows who we are now. The boys nodded. No one challenged the idea. No one pushed back. They gathered their instruments, took a collective breath, and began searching for a sound that reflected their growth. Hours passed as they experimented, stumbled, laughed, and tried again. The arrogance that once drove their sessions had vanished. What remained was genuine curiosity. By sunset, a melody emerged, soft at first, then rising with power. The guitarist found a chord progression that felt like sunrise after a long night. The bassist created a line that matched the new energy in their hearts. The drummer shaped a beat that pulsed like something awakening. And Zach, who once shouted everything, began to write lyrics quietly at the corner of the room. He read the first lines aloud when he finally finished them. We thought the past was broken strings, but now we know old chords still sing. The room fell silent, not from uncertainty, but from recognition. They felt the words settle into the air like truth. It was their story, stripped bare and rebuilt. The title came naturally after that. No age, just sound. It was more than a song. It was a statement, a bridge between who they had been and who they were becoming. A few days later, Razor Dog received an invitation to perform at a local community charity event. It was smaller than the youth competition held in a park, surrounded by families, food trucks, and local vendors. Zach felt nervous accepting the invitation. The moments from the jam still followed them everywhere. They knew people expected something different now. The day of the event arrived under a bright blue sky. Families spread blankets across the grass. Children carried balloons. Elderly couples walked slowly toward the stage, leaning on canes or holding hands. The audience was a mix of generations, gathered not for competition, but for connection. Razor Dog stepped onto the stage with their instruments, hearts pounding but steady. Zach leaned into the microphone and introduced their new song. This one is called No Age, Just Sound. We wrote it because of what we learned." The crowd cheered softly, encouraging them. The boys exchanged a final nod. The drummer started first, his beat steady, confident, and calm. The guitarist added the warm progression they had built together. The bassist followed with the deeper pulse that anchored it all. And Zach stepped forward, voice softer than usual, but richer, fuller, carrying the weight of sincerity. We thought the past was broken strings, but now we know old chords still sing. The melody drifted across the park, settling over families, drifting through the trees, echoing in the hearts of those who understood its meaning. The song belonged to everyone, but they were not finished yet. As the first chorus faded into the open air, something shifted near the side of the stage. Razordog did not notice at first. They were too focused on the rhythm, too lost in the sound they had created from honesty instead of ego. But the crowd began murmuring, then smiling, then pointing toward the edge of the platform. Zach turned his head. Walking toward them with a familiar, calm stride was Keanu, carrying his worn bass case in one hand. For a moment, the boys froze. Zach's mouth parted. The guitarist nearly missed a chord. The drummer's sticks slowed mid-air. But the shock lasted only a second before the crowd erupted into applause that rolled across the park like a gust of wind. Children clapped wildly. Elderly fans brightened beneath the sun. Parents laughed and raised their phones. Keanu stepped onto the stage with a warm smile. He nodded to the boys, acknowledging what they were doing without interrupting it. His presence did not feel like a surprise appearance from a celebrity. It felt like an older friend arriving at the exact right moment. He removed his bass from the case and lifted the strap over his shoulder. The boys watched breathless, feeling a familiar humility settle around them. Keanu approached Zach and whispered gently, "Keep going." Zach exhaled, nodded, and signaled the band to move into the bridge. The guitarist shifted into a soft build. The bassist held the low notes steady. The drummer tapped a delicate pattern that left space for something new to enter. Keanu stepped in, his bass lines wrapped around the melody like a second heartbeat, warm and grounding. He did not overpower the boys. He joined them, lifting their song higher, giving their message weight and soul. The audience heard it immediately. The music that had already touched them now carried a new kind of glow. Parents swayed to the rhythm. Children danced. Elderly fans wiped their eyes, moved by the beauty of generations sharing one sound. Zach began the final chorus, his voice steady and sure. "We thought the past was broken strings, but now we know old chords still sing. No age, just sound. No walls, just sound." The lyrics carried through the park like a blessing. When the song ended, the final note lingered in the bright afternoon air. The crowd rose to their feet in a powerful ovation. Not loud, not frantic, but grateful. The kind of applause that came from hearts touched, not just ears entertained. Zach looked at Keanu with tears brimming in his eyes. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder and gave him a nod that said everything without a word. Razordog had reclaimed their sound, and now with Keanu beside them, they had shared it with the world. The weekend after Razordog's charity performance, something remarkable began happening across the country. Community centers, school districts, coffee house venues, and local music festivals started announcing a new kind of event. Youth bands were being paired with older musicians, not as judges, not as instructors, as collaborators. Some called the events jam generations, others branded them bridges through sound. A few simply wrote what they felt. Young meets old, music meets heart. Clips of these collaborations began filling social media. A 12-year-old drummer from Michigan performed beside a 60-year-old blues guitarist, their rhythm aligning as naturally as breathing. A teenage singer from Arizona harmonized with a grandmother who had once led a rock band in the 70s. A young bassist in Texas posted a video of himself learning his first classic rock lines from a retired studio musician. The caption beneath it read, "I get it now." The movement grew faster than anyone expected. Reporters reached out to the Santa Cruz Amphitheater to ask how the moment began. Volunteers described the shift in the room when Keanu played beside Razor Dog. Judges talked about watching arrogance dissolve into connection. Parents shared how their kids started listening to their old record collections, asking questions about music from decades before they were born. One evening, a production company announced something that lit up the internet again. A documentary was in development titled Basslines and Bridges. It would explore the relationship between generations of musicians and how a single moment on a small California stage sparked a worldwide conversation. Keanu had agreed to narrate it. The announcement photo showed him sitting quietly in a recording studio with his bass beside him, the same calm confidence radiating from his expression. Fans celebrated the news immediately. They commented that he was the perfect narrator, not because of fame, but because of heart. Independent musicians spoke about how much they looked forward to a documentary that honored the real spirit of music rather than the competitive side of it. Teachers wrote that they planned to show it in their classrooms the moment it released. Meanwhile, Olivia found herself in a whirlwind of invitations. Schools, universities, and even major speaking events reached out to her. They wanted her to talk about what she witnessed that day between Keanu and Razor Dog. She accepted one invitation in particular, knowing it would allow the message to reach thousands. A TED Talk. She spent days preparing gathering clips of intergenerational performances, writing notes about humility and artistic lineage, and studying the emotions she had seen on stage. When she finally walked onto the TED stage, she spoke with the quiet conviction of someone who understood the heart of the story. She told the crowd that music had never belonged to one age group. It had always been a chain passed from hand to hand, decade after decade, growing stronger as more voices added to it. She ended her talk with a single line. Art thrives when generations listen to each other. Her talk went viral within hours, but the most surprising response came from someone who rarely stepped into the spotlight. Bill, the roadie. A local news station asked him for a short interview, and the producers expected a simple response. Instead, Bill became an overnight sensation. Bill arrived at the small studio wearing his usual work jeans and faded gray hoodie. He looked slightly uncomfortable in front of the lights, but he carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had spent years behind the scenes. The interviewer asked him what it felt like to witness the moment that had captivated the world. Bill rubbed the back of his neck and chuckled softly before answering. "I saw it coming," he said. "That man does not speak loudly. He lets the strings do the talking." The simplicity of his words struck viewers right in the heart. Clips of his interview spread across social media. People praised the honesty. Others commented that Bill had captured Keanu's essence better than any reporter ever had. Some even joked that Bill should host the documentary himself. His interview became one of the most widely shared clips of the week, with fans calling him the guardian angel who helped bring the moment to life. As the movement continued to grow, schools began teaching small workshops inspired by the jam. Music teachers encouraged students to bring in songs their parents or grandparents loved. Older volunteers visited classrooms to play alongside teenagers. One high school put up a hallway poster that read, "No age, just sound." Students added handwritten notes around it, sharing stories about the music their families had introduced them to. The project spread to other schools across the district. Concert halls took notice as well. Several major orchestras began inviting young rock musicians to rehearse with them, creating surprising and beautiful hybrids of sound. One video from New York showed a youth punk band playing beside a full-string ensemble. The conductor wrote that the blend of raw energy and classical structure created something unforgettable. Even the business side of music shifted. Record labels began reaching out to older musicians they had once overlooked, inviting them to collaborate with emerging artists. Live venues that had focused only on youth bands started booking double-generation lineups. It boosted ticket sales, but more importantly, it brought communities together in ways no one had expected. And through it all, Keanu remained humble and quiet. He attended a few events when invited, always standing to the side, always offering encouragement rather than taking the spotlight. Fans approached him with gratitude, and he responded with the same gentle smile. that had become part of the story itself. He reminded every musician he met to keep practicing, keep listening, and keep connecting. Back in Santa Cruz, the amphitheater where it all began installed a small plaque backstage. It read, "In honor of the night music, reminded us we belong to each other." Razor Dog visited the plaque during a return performance. Zach touched it gently and said the words he had carried with him ever since. "We learned because someone listened to us first." The message echoed far beyond California. It traveled through cities, towns, and rural communities. It inspired musicians to keep creating families, to share memories, and strangers to connect through the universal language of sound. The moment was no longer just a viral clip. It had become a legacy. Night settled gently over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across Keanu's home. The city outside hummed with distant traffic, but inside, everything was still. Keanu preferred it that way. Silence made room for his thoughts, and tonight those thoughts were full of music, full of memory, full of the echoes of a week that had reshaped so many lives. He entered his small writing room, the one place in his home untouched by modern distraction. A single candle flickered on the wooden desk, casting warm light across several worn journals stacked neatly beside it. The scent of sandalwood drifted through the air from a newly lit incense stick resting on a ceramic tray. Keanu set his bass gently on the cushioned stand near the desk, then sat down, letting the quiet settle over him like a blanket. He opened one of the journals. The pages were filled with entries from decades of reflection, emotions captured during times when the world expected him to stay silent. His pen moved slowly as he began to write. "Arrogance is not a flaw of the young. It is a call for guidance." He paused. The candle flame swayed slightly its glow, softening the edges of the room. He thought of Zach, of his trembling confession, of the tears that had fallen in front of hundreds of people, of the courage it took for a young man to stand completely exposed in a moment that could have destroyed him. Keanu wrote again, "What we call arrogance is often a shield for fear." He rested his pen, breathing deeply as memories from his own youth rose like waves. He remembered the times he had stumbled, the times he had spoken too quickly, the times he had been so sure of himself that he silenced the wisdom around him, the times he had been humbled by life gently or harshly. Then one memory surfaced above the rest. A sound tech from his early Dogstar days. A quiet man named Michael who had saved him from giving up after a disastrous rehearsal. Keanu remembered the moment clearly. He had been frustrated, overwhelmed, convinced he didn't belong on stage. Michael had walked over, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said only one sentence, "Everyone who's great starts with doubt. Keep going." Keanu had kept going. He wrote the memory down slowly, letting the gratitude wash through him. Without Michael, he might never have stayed with music long enough to discover what it meant to him. Without Michael, he might never have reached these moments where his experience could help someone else grow. He leaned back, closing the journal gently. The candle crackled as it burned lower. On the shelf beside him sat a framed photo of his old Dogstar bandmates, their younger faces frozen in time. They were smiling, carefree, passionate. His heart softened at the sight of them. They had believed in him before he believed in himself. The room felt warm with memory. Keanu looked at his bass resting on the stand. He rose from the chair, picked it up slowly, and held it as if greeting an old friend. His fingers rested on the strings, waiting, listening. Then he began to play. A soft melody filled the candlelit room. A melody meant for no audience. A melody meant for healing. The melody drifted through the quiet room like a memory unfolding itself note by note. Keanu closed his eyes as his fingers moved, following instinct rather than structure. The bass line rose, gently dipped, then rose again, carrying pieces of the past and present woven into one warm thread. It was not a song meant for performance. It was a conversation, a way of letting his heart speak without needing words. He played slowly, savoring the depth in each vibration. The candle flickered with the rhythm, sending soft shadows dancing across the walls. The incense burned steadily, its faint smoke curling upward like a question rising toward the ceiling. Outside, the night deepened, wrapping the city in a blanket of calm. As he continued to play, Keanu reflected on the path that had led him here, the mistakes he had made, the lessons he had carried, the people who had guided him without expecting anything in return. He remembered nights spent in small rehearsal rooms, trying to find confidence in a world that often felt too loud. He remembered the moments when he doubted whether he deserved to stand beside real musicians. And he remembered the quiet encouragement that kept him moving forward. He opened his eyes and glanced again at the photograph of his old bandmates. Their smiles seemed brighter in the candlelight, as if the room itself honored the history resting on that shelf. They were young in that photo, full of hope, full of belief in the idea that music was meant to be shared, not hoarded. Keanu let the final note fade slowly. The room exhaled with him. He set the bass down gently and returned to his desk. The journal lay open, the ink on the last line still drying. He ran his thumb along the edge of the page and thought of Zach's letter, of the framed razor dog shirt hanging in his studio, of the young musicians who had found courage not through perfection, but through honesty. He wrote one more line beneath his earlier reflection. Guidance is a gift we pass forward. He closed the journal and placed it beside the others. Then he blew out the candle. The flame vanished with a soft breath, leaving a warm trail of smoke drifting upward. The only light left in the room came from the soft glow of the incense. Keanu rested his palms on the desk and allowed the darkness to settle gently around him. He felt peaceful, not because he had solved anything, not because he had taught a lesson, but because he had witnessed growth, and he understood that growth was the true melody that connected generations. Before leaving the room, he looked once more at the photograph of his bandmates. Their smiles reminded him of a younger version of himself who had needed guidance. Now, he had become the one offering it. He whispered a quiet thank you to the empty room, turned off the last remaining light, and stepped into the stillness of the night. A full year passed, yet the memory of the Santa Cruz Jam continued to echo across the music world. What began as a spontaneous moment between generations had quietly grown into something far stronger. Across cities, towns, and small communities, musicians young and old found themselves sharing stages, rehearsal rooms, and late-night jam sessions. And, at the heart of it all, was the place where it began. The Santa Cruz Rock Fest returned with a larger crowd than it had ever seen. Families traveled from neighboring states to attend. Retired musicians brought their instruments out from attics and closets. Teen bands practiced for weeks, not only for the chance to perform, but for the possibility of being paired with someone who carried decades of history in their fingertips. This year, the festival added something new to its program, a segment called Generations Jam. It was printed boldly in the center of the brochure, decorated with photographs of past performers. The description read, "A celebration of sound shared across time. Teen bands will partner with veteran artists for collaborative performances." The idea resonated deeply. The seats filled early as people gathered to witness the new tradition take shape. Backstage, Razor Dog moved with a calmer confidence than they had a year ago. They were no longer the loudest voices in the hall. They were mentors now. Their role this year was to guide a middle school band called the Valley Echoes, a group of nervous but excited 12 and 13-year-olds who clutched their instruments with trembling hands. Zach knelt beside the drummer, a boy with dark curls and wide eyes. He adjusted the height of the snare drum and said softly, "Remember, you do not have to prove anything. Just feel the music." The boy nodded quickly, breathing easier. The guitarist from Razor Dog gently tuned a little girl's instrument, showing her how to place her fingers for the opening chord. Their bassist chatted quietly with two shy twins holding matching ukuleles, helping them laugh through their nerves. The transformation was obvious. Razor Dog had grown into musicians who taught with empathy, not ego. They knew what the younger kids were feeling because they had stood in those shoes only a year earlier. The crowd buzzed with anticipation as the Generations Jam segment approached. Vendors sold out of drinks. Parents lifted their younger children onto their shoulders, Older fans leaned forward on walkers, smiling broadly as they waited for the music to begin. What no one expected was who quietly walked into the festival grounds just before the segment began. Keanu Reeves arrived without announcement. No entourage, no security. Just a hoodie, jeans, and a calm presence. He slipped into the crowd unnoticed at first, blending in easily. Only a few people recognized him, and they respectfully kept their distance. He stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching the young musicians prepare backstage. He did not come to perform. He came to witness what the world had done with the moment he helped create. As the hosts introduced Razor Dog and their young mentees, Zach moved to the edge of the stage to check the crowd. His eyes scanned faces, watching for cues, scanning for nervous families of the younger band. Then he froze. There, halfway back in the crowd, stood Keanu. Quiet, still, watching with a soft expression that said everything. Zach's breath hitched. He stepped off stage. Zach walked quickly through the side aisle, weaving between families and volunteers, until he reached the spot where Keanu stood. The crowd parted without complaint, sensing something meaningful unfolding. When Zach reached him, he stopped for a moment to steady his breath. A year ago, he would have approached with swagger. Today, he approached with gratitude. Keanu lifted his head slightly, recognizing him instantly. His smile appeared slow and warm, the kind that made Zach feel seen without being judged. "You came," Zach said quietly. Keanu nodded. "I wanted to see what you built." Zach looked toward the stage where the Valley Echoes waited with trembling excitement. Then he looked back at the man who had changed everything. His voice grew steadier as he spoke. "Wanna jam one more time?" The question hung in the air, carrying none of the bravado it once would have, and all the humility he had learned. The invitation was honest, it was hopeful, and it belonged to the young man he had become, not the boy he had once been. Keanu's expression softened even more. "Only if you lead." Zach felt his chest swell. He nodded, unable to hide the emotional weight of the moment. He turned, motioning for Keanu to follow him. The crowd watched with widening eyes as the two walked side by side toward the stage. Whispers spread like sparks in dry grass. Is that really him? Is he going to play? Did they plan this? Phones lifted instinctively, though the moment felt too sacred for shouting. Even the hosts stood frozen as Zach led Keanu up the steps and onto the stage. The Valley Echoes stared in shock. The young drummer's jaw dropped. The little girl with the guitar covered her mouth with both hands. The twins holding ukuleles squeaked with excitement and clutched their instruments as if afraid to faint. Zach knelt beside them. "It is okay," he whispered. "He is here for all of us." Keanu approached the children, slowly lowering himself to eye level. His presence was calm, welcoming, warm. He asked softly, "You ready to make some sound?" The little girl nodded so fast, her hair bounced. The crowd quieted as Razor Dog and the Valley Echoes gathered in formation. The host handed Keanu a bass from the side stand. He slung it across his shoulder with familiar ease. Zach moved to the microphone, but he did not raise it yet. He waited until the crowd fell completely silent, a hush sweeping over the field like a breeze. "We started a tradition last year," he said. "A tradition of listening, a tradition of learning, and today we carry it forward." He looked at Keanu. "Lead us in." Keanu nodded once, lifted his fingers to the strings, and struck a warm, steady note that flowed across the festival grounds like a gentle tide. The Generations Jam began again, this time led by the young, supported by the old, watched by everyone. And as Zach stepped into the rhythm, he felt the truth settle deep within him. Traditions are not born from perfection. They are born from moments of humility shared between hearts. The sun dipped behind the hills of Santa Cruz as the Generations Jam reached its final notes. The sound rolled across the open field, warm and steady, carrying with it the unmistakable energy of connection. Families stood side by side. Teenagers leaned forward on the barricades. Elderly fans tapped their fingers against canes or walkers. Every person in the field felt the same quiet truth settle into them. Music had built a bridge. On stage, Zach stood next to Keanu, letting the last vibrations of the bass fade into the evening air. The Valley Echoes smiled proudly beside Razordog, glowing with the thrill of having shared a stage with musicians they admired. Keanu placed a gentle hand on Zach's shoulder, nodding as if to say that the tradition now belonged to him. When the applause finally softened, Keanu stepped back from the microphone, allowing the younger musicians to bow first. The crowd responded with a mixture of cheers and misty smiles. Phones went up, not to chase a viral moment, but to capture something that felt like hope. The festival lights dimmed as the host thanked the performers. The stage slowly grew quiet. Volunteers began clearing equipment while families gathered their belongings. Children mimicked the sounds they had heard, trying to copy the beats or strum patterns. Older fans talked about concerts they remembered from decades ago, smiling as if someone had returned something important to them. As the field emptied, Zach stayed behind for a moment. He looked at the spot where he had just played beside Keanu. A year earlier, he had stood on that same stage, filled with ego. Today he stood filled with gratitude. He breathed in the cool evening air and let the feeling sink deeply into him. Later that night, the screen of the video fades to black. A single line of text appears glowing softly against the darkness. Respect does not come from age. It comes from listening. The message lingers for several seconds, steady and full, carrying the weight of everything that happened. Beneath the text, faint guitar strings echo the melody Zach and the kids had played earlier that day. It is soft, nostalgic, almost like a heartbeat from the story itself. Then the black fades into one final image. Zach kneels beside a young boy in a quiet garage. The boy is 8 or 9 years old, holding a beginner bass with hands too small to stretch across the strings. His expression is focused, hopeful, unsure. Zach gently positions the boy's fingers, guiding them across the frets one by one. "Try this pattern," Zach says softly. "It is the first riff I ever learned. Someone special once taught it to me." The boy nods, concentrating hard. He plucks the strings. The sound is uneven, rough around the edges, but full of genuine effort. Zach smiles. He places his own bass strap over his shoulder and plays the same riff beside the boy, giving him something to follow. Together, the notes rise and fall, simple yet powerful. In that moment, the cycle continues. The music is passed forward. The lesson repeats itself in a new heart. The camera lingers on the scene as the sound grows clearer, the two bass lines sinking slowly. The lights fade into soft gold around them, and the story prepares for its final message. The camera slowly pulls back, revealing the small garage lit by a single warm lamp. The walls are covered with posters, some brand new, some faded with age. Classic rock legends hang beside modern bands. On the far corner, a framed Razordog shirt, signed by the original lineup, sits next to a photo of Zach and Keanu, standing shoulder to shoulder at the very first generation's jam. Beneath it rests a tiny plaque that reads, "Listen first, play second." The boy tries the riff again. This time his hands are a little steadier. Zach nods, tapping his foot to help him catch the rhythm. The boy smiles wider, encouraged by the small progress. It is a moment Zach recognizes deeply because he once stood in the exact same space, uncertain, stubborn, and sure he knew more than he actually did. But someone stepped in with patience. Someone guided him. Someone listened to him before teaching him. And now he is doing the same. As the boy finishes the riff, Zach puts a hand on his shoulder. "That was good, better than good. Keep practicing that one. It will connect you to something bigger than the music." The boy glances at the framed photo on the wall. "Did he really teach you?" Zach nods. "He didn't teach me with words. He taught me by showing up, by playing with us instead of against us, by proving that music isn't something you own, it's something you share." The boy looks down at his bass, absorbing the lesson. Zach smiles and hands him a small notebook filled with blank pages. "Write your own songs here," he says, "and leave space for the ones you'll learn along the way." The music fades into silence as the screen transitions back to black. A soft glow appears on the right side, outlining the words that close the story. Have you ever judged someone by their age, Or been judged yourself? The question floats gently, allowing viewers to reflect. Then, a second line appears, inviting them deeper. Share your own moment in the comments. Tell us how music humility or a second chance shaped your life. The words fade, replaced by a final message. And if you believe kindness sounds louder than arrogance, tap the subscribe button and join us for the next story. Because the world needs more moments like this. Soft music returns, echoing the warm bass line Keanu played on stage. The final image reappears briefly, Zach helping the young boy form the same bass shape Keanu once demonstrated to him. 2 hands on the same instrument, 2 generations sharing the same note. Then the screen dims completely, leaving behind only the feeling of connection, healing, and the sense that music will always find a way to bring people together. The story ends, but the echo continues.